tonight. I've been doing some research, and with this being an election year, there are a lot of things that are at stake during this upcoming election. And if you allow the Republicans and their base tell it, President Biden and Vice President Harris haven't done anything over the past 4 years. Well, I've decided to set the record straight, and I'm going to begin a three-part series about the accomplishments of the Biden-Harris record. So this is what I'm going to be talking about tonight, and all my information is coming from www.whitehouse.gov. That's www.whitehouse.gov. So let's get started. When President Biden and Vice President Harris took office, our country faced unprecedented crises, a raging pandemic, an economic crisis, climate crisis, and racial injustice. The president and vice president ran for office on the promise to move quickly to tackle these crises head on and deliver results for working families. That's what the Biden-Harris administration has done. So tonight in part one, I'm going to talk about some of the top accomplishments of the Biden-Harris records. Lowering cost of families, everyday expenses. More people are working than at any point in American history. Making more in America. Rescue the economy and change the course of the pandemic. Rebuilding our nation's infrastructure. Historic expansion of benefits and services for toxic, exposed veterans. The first meaningful gun violence reduction legislation in 30 years. Protected marriage for LGBTQ plus and interracial couples. Historic confirmation of Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson and federal judges of diverse backgrounds. Rallied the world to support Ukraine in response to Putin's aggression. Strengthened alliances and partnerships to deliver for the American people. Successful counterterrorism missions against the leaders of Al Qaeda and ISIS. Executive orders protecting reproductive rights. Historic student debt relief for middle and working class families, ending our failed approach to marijuana. Advancing equity and racial justice, including historic criminal justice reforms. Also delivering on the most aggressive climate environmental justice agenda in American history, and more people with health care insurance. So let's talk about these one by one. And let's talk about lowering the cost of families for everyday expenses. The Inflation Reduction Act is a historic legislative achievement that lowers costs for families, combats the climate crisis, reduces the deficit, and finally makes the largest corporations pay their fair share. For the first time, Medicare is able to negotiate the price of certain high-cost drugs. A month's supply of insulin for seniors is capped at $35. Medicare beneficiaries pay zero out of pocket for recommended adult vaccines, and seniors' out-of-pocket expenses at the pharmacy will be capped at $2,000 a year. And thanks to the president's actions, including a historic release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, gas prices are down more than $1.60 from their summer of 2022 peak. Wow. That's a lot right there. Let me get back to some of the other things here. Okay, point number two. More people are working than at any point in American history. As a result of President Biden's economic plan, 2021 and 2022 were the two strongest years of job growth in history. Nearly 11 million jobs have been created since President Biden took office, including 750,000 manufacturing jobs. The Republicans are not going to talk about that. You know they don't want to talk about that because Republicans don't do anything. It's just investigation after investigation after investigation after investigation that leads to nothing and leads to nowhere. The unemployment rate is at a 50-year low, and a record number of small businesses have started since President Biden took office, Black Americans and Hispanic Americans have near record low unemployment rates, and people with disabilities are experiencing record low unemployment. All right, let's go on to point 3 here of the Biden-Harris record. Making more what in America? So let's find out. As a result of historic legislation, the president has signed into law, there is a manufacturing boom taking hold across America. In 2 years, companies have announced nearly $300 billion in manufacturing investments in the United States. These investments are ensuing the technologies of the future are made in America and bringing back supply chains from overseas. And they are creating good paying jobs, including union jobs and jobs that don't require a 4-year degree. Not everybody wants to go to college. And you know what? Everybody doesn't have to go to college because it's expensive. How do I know? Because I'm a criminal justice major and I know how expensive it is. So the Biden-Harris administration rescued the economy and changed the course of the pandemic. Soon after taking office with a pandemic raging and the economy reeling, the president signed the American Rescue Plan to change the course of the pandemic and jumpstart our economic recovery. The American Rescue Plan fueled or funded our successful vaccination campaign, safely reopened schools for in-person learning, and helped 200,000 child care providers keep their doors open and delivered relief to American families. Awesome. Now let's talk about the rebuilding of the nation's infrastructure. Washington policymakers celebrated, quote, Infrastructure Week, close quote, without ever delivering. President Biden got it done. He worked across the aisle to forge consensus and pass the bipartisan infrastructure law, a once-in-a-generation investment in our nation's infrastructure. We are building our roads, bridges, ports, and airports, upgrading public transit and rail systems, replacing lead pipes to provide clean water, cleaning up pollution, providing affordable high-speed internet to every family in America, delivering cheaper and cleaner energy to households and businesses, and creating good-paying jobs, including union jobs and jobs that don't require a 4-year degree. Well, I know for a fact that infrastructure is at an all-time high, because everywhere you go, you see just nothing but building and building and more building and more building. So the historic expansion of benefits and services for toxic exposed veterans. You know, like I know, this has been a hot topic and a hot button issue, because many of the nation's veterans, they have fought in the wars, they come home virtually to nothing. President Biden signed into law the PACT Act, the most significant expansion of benefits and services for toxic exposed veterans in more than 30 years. This law also enables the Department of Veterans Affairs to move more quickly in the future to determine if illnesses are related to military service, and it offers critical support to survivors who are harmed by exposures. And the law authorized 31 new clinical sites and provides VA several tools and resources to ensure effective implementation of the law. Relief for veterans. Wonderful. So, just talk about gun violence, because gun violence from city to city is at an all-time high. And I oftentimes ask this question: how do the guns get into the city? Because the black people don't have manufacturing companies to make the guns. So how are they getting there? It makes you wonder sometimes. So the first meaningful gun violence reduction legislation that has occurred in 30 years. President Biden brought together Democrats and Republicans to pass the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first major piece of gun safety legislation in 3 decades. The law will save lives by requiring young people ages 18 to 21 to undergo enhanced background checks, narrowing the boyfriend loophole to keep guns out of the hands of convicted dating partners, funding crisis interventions, including extreme risk protection order, red flag laws, making significant investments to address the mental health crisis in America, including in our schools, clarifying who needs to register as a federally licensed gun dealer and run background checks before selling a single weapon, and making gun trafficking and straw purchases distinct federal crimes. You know, some folks might not like to hear things like this, but it's good to know what you're talking about when you're running for re-election, rather, and that's a stipulated fact. And one thing that the Biden administration needs to do, y'all need to start talking more about what you have done. Let your enemies be your enemies. They're always going to be there. It is what it is. You know, Democrats and Republicans, they always fight. And next is on the list of accomplishments. Over 10 years ago, President Biden announced his support for marriage equality, becoming the highest ranking U.S. government official to do so. Building on his long-standing support and generations of civil rights advocacy, President Biden signed historic bipartisan legislation protecting marriage for same-sex and interracial couples, and the president took historic steps to advance full equality for LGBTQ plus Americans, including reversing the discriminatory ban on transgender service members in the military, strengthening non-discrimination protections in healthcare, housing, education, and employment, and ensuring that transgender Americans can access government support and services. We live in a nation that's comprised of many, many people, whether folk like it or not. This is America. Next, I'm going to talk about the historic confirmation of Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. Show our picture there. I want her to be more vocal on the Supreme Court. And don't be afraid to speak up. She's a justice just like the rest of them. President Biden nominated and the Senate confirmed Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first Black woman to serve on the Supreme Court. Justice Jackson is one of our nation's brightest legal minds and has unprecedented experience in our legal system. President Biden's other judicial appointees include record percentages of women, racial, and ethnic minorities, and civil rights lawyers and public defenders. 66% of President Biden's nominees are women, and 65% are people of color. And there are certain, let me just say this, I gather my news source, my information from a lot of different sources, but I don't favor sources that are discriminatory toward people. So executive orders protecting, let me talk about the reproductive rights. Since the Supreme Court took away constitutional right from the American people, President Biden and Vice President Harris are taking action to defund reproductive rights. Are taking the action to defend, reproductive rights. The president has signed executive orders to protect across to reproductive health, or to protect access. Let me read that again. Since the Supreme Court took away a constitutional right from the American people, President Biden and Vice President Harris are taking action to defend reproductive rights. The president has signed executive orders to protect access to reproductive health care, including abortion and contraception, and safeguard patient privacy and sensitive health information. And has made clear his commitment to fighting any attack by a state or local official who attempts to interfere with women exercising their constitutional right to travel out of state for medical care, i.e. As President Biden's direction, or at President Biden's direction, the United States took key leaders of ISIS and Al Qaeda off the battlefield, demonstrating our resolve and ability to defend the American people against those who seek to do us harm, and in ways that do not require risking the lives of thousands of Americans on the ground. These successful missions have sent a powerful message to all terrorists who threaten America and our interests around the world that the United States is committed to being relentless in these efforts. Next is the historic student debt relief for middle class and working Americans. The Biden administration announced debt relief of up to $20,000 for Americans earning less than $125,000 per year who had Pell Grants in college, and up to $10,000 for all other borrowers below that income threshold. More than 40 million borrowers stand to benefit from this action, and about 20 million would see their debt entirely wiped out, and nearly 90% of this relief will go to borrowers earning less than $75,000 per year. In early 2023, the Biden-Harris administration announced a plan to provide millions of borrowers with more affordable monthly student loan payments through changes to income-driven repayment plans. We're talking about accomplishments now of the Biden-Harris administration. Next up, ending our failed approach to marijuana. To help remedy our country's failed approach to marijuana, including racial disparities, the president pardoned all prior federal offenses of simple marijuana possession and urged governors to do the same. The administration is also initiating the process to review how marijuana is scheduled under federal law. Marijuana is currently a Scheduled I drug, the same classification as for heroin and LSD, and even higher than for fentanyl and methamphetamine. Next up is advancing equity and racial injustice, including historic criminal justice reform. On his first day in public office, President Biden signed a historic executive order directing the federal government to use every tool available to advance equity and racial justice. As a result, the administration has taken bold action to narrow the racial wealth gap, invest in communications facing persistent poverty, and advance programs and policies to deliver racial justice. President Biden has delivered criminal justice reforms to improve prison conditions and help people get back on their feet after incarceration. To strengthen public safety and public trust, he signed a landmark executive order on safe, executive, and accountable policing that mandated federal reforms, such as banning chokeholds, restricting no-knock entries, creating a national police accountability database, and restricting the transfer of military equipment to local police departments. So you all didn't know that police departments around the nation have war equipment that's been donated to them. Delivering one of the most aggressive climate environmental justice agenda in American history. The U.S. is positioned to achieve our ambitious climate goals of cutting our emissions in half by 2030 and net zero emissions by 2050. The president has taken executive action and signed legislation to develop clean energy at home, accelerate the adoption of electric vehicles, and reduce pollution that endangers overburdened communities. And the president is lowering energy costs for families, creating good paying jobs, and ensuring America leads the global clean energy economy. The president also protected more lands and waters in his first year than any president since John F. Kennedy. May he rest in peace. More people are getting health insurance than ever before. President Biden took action to lower the cost of health care for millions of Americans. Right now, 4 out of 5 people who sign up for health insurance through the Affordable Health Care Act, the one that Republicans proposed, remember? Yeah, y'all remember, and they were the first ones to sign up for it once it was passed and signed into law. So, and find health coverage for, listen, $10 a month or less than millions of Americans on Obamacare are saving an average of $800 a year. Since he took office, there has been a combined 50% increase in enrollment in states that use healthcare.gov, and the nation's uninsured rate is historically low at 8%. Over 16 million Americans signed up for equality affordable health coverage, the highest number ever produced in an open enrollment period. Now that's just the short list. So in part two, I'll be talking about 30 things that President Biden did as president you might have missed. But for now, I'm Tyrone Bowman. Never surrender, never quit.